Tell me about yourself. Hello, my name is Andrew Higgins. I am currently a freshman actuarial science student at Temple University. I am passionate about mathematics and its various applications, so naturally the predictive and modeling applications of mathematics and problem solvings piqued my interest, and I am driven to refine my skills in this field to become the best that I can as soon as I can. Much of the discipline I have developed and applied to my studies and work can be attributed to my 11-year dedication with the violin. My experience with the violin required me to meet constant deadlines thrust upon me by my very strict teacher, which, if not met, would lead to humiliation of poor performance in public. On the other hand, if they were met, they gave me a great sense of accomplishment. This is where I developed an intrinsic motivation towards work I am passionate about. Seeing positive results from hard work provided a greater satisfaction than material rewards possibly could. The satisfaction combines with additional intrinsic motivation I have towards mathematics. Being passionate about it makes me want to learn as much as I possibly can about it. Additionally, the fulfillment I feel after solving a problem is far greater than that of any potential salary I could earn. Having so many years of experience with the violin also allowed me to understand the importance of disciplined practice. It taught me that focused practice was the only way to achieve greatness, and this principle carries over nicely to nearly any discipline, such as actuarial science. The violin also gave me experience as a leader that I wouldn't have gained otherwise. For 2 years in high school, I was the concertmaster of the school orchestra, which left me in charge of making sure all orchestral sections and their leaders were on top of their assignments or in conjunction with my responsibility as leader of the first violin section. Tell me about a significant accomplishment in your life. One of my most significant accomplishments was the time I led my school's orchestra to the Maryland State Orchestral Festival, as it gave me serious validation as a leader. I was first selected as concertmaster of North Hagerstown High School's orchestra my junior year to lead a group of predominantly comprised of seniors. About 75% of the total group was seniors, and it was a group of 40. This, of course, led many to doubt my authority. I didn't have the same seniority that they did, which initially made members believe I wasn't as qualified for the position as others, namely a senior girl named Bridget, were. However, my legitimate power was truly legitimized when I was given the opportunity to display a competence Bridget did not have, a formal classical technique-intensive training, which led to efficient learning and ultimately a better final product of performance. I learned that my expert power of such technique-intensive preparation resonated within the orchestra most profoundly. With this level of expertise, my section finally followed my advice and responded well to guidance, despite the fact that they had been in the orchestra longer than I had, as they observed the impact that it had on my playing and realized it could have the same impact on theirs. Additionally, leaders of other sections, the principal second violin, the principal violist, the principal cellist, and the principal bassist, emulated my same teaching methodology, which I had adapted from my private instructor through years of study. The orchestra was not accustomed to the restless dedication to practice that I had always been accustomed to. The environment had lost all urgency towards preparation, which was reflected in the quality of music it performed. It wasn't necessarily that the group performed bad music, but the group had so many talented players it just seemed like it was underperforming by mediocre play. The solution I implemented was to frequently give sectional-specific instruction, as this was a more efficient means of practice than the entire group having to stop constantly for one section's little mistakes. This made practice significantly more efficient, increased the amount of time each group actually spent practicing, and enabled all sections to have a solid grasp on their specific parts, which, in the end, made the entire production better. The increased production inspired the orchestra as a whole, as they saw the technical focus improving their playing ability. As a whole, Morale went from indifferent to high in just a matter of months. As a result, during our countywide orchestral festival, a festival that all schools in the county participate in, where schools are judged on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is superior and 5 is poor, and the top 1 or 2 schools do end up going on to the state festival. We received a superior rating of 1 and moved on to the state festival, which was not accomplished in the year before. At the state festival, we received a good but not superior rating of a unanimous 2. The changes I implemented as a leader of North Hagerstown High School's orchestra improved group morale, increased productivity, and saw immediate results of increased dedication. This personally gave me great validation as a leader, and on a more emotional level, I got to see my newfound friends grow and succeed with me along the way. Tell me about another significant accomplishment in your life. Another significant accomplishment, even more challenging than the last, was leading the North Hagerstown High School Orchestra to a second consecutive state festival. There were 2 separate orchestras at my school. There was the freshman orchestra and the symphony orchestra, which was comprised of the sophomores, juniors, and seniors. After my first year as concertmaster, the vast majority of existing members of the symphony orchestra, as said before, were seniors and thus graduated, which was about 75% of our orchestra at the time, leaving only 10 total experienced members left, while a new majority, about 20, of fairly inexperienced now sophomores joined. As a result, the majority of the orchestra was not familiar with my leadership style, and they had fewer musical skills and competencies than the group before had. Essentially, I was faced with the task of rebuilding with a technically less skilled group. On top of that, the success of a year before had created higher expectations for this year, despite the fact that I had less to work with. Regardless, I tried not to let these disadvantages overwhelm me. I maintained a solid mission to get to the state festival, like we did in the year prior, through an unchanged vision of technical discipline and a concentration on sectional practice and independence. Unfortunately, this group of sophomores was initially far less responsive to my leadership than the members present the year prior. The intense, focused practice that the previous group thrived with seemed to lower morale among this group of sophomores, who evidently didn't believe that the benefits that followed this sort of dedication outweighed the commitment of said dedication. I overheard several members claiming that at one point they wanted to quit. At this moment, I knew change had to be made. I realized I had attempted to pick up where I left off in the previous year, despite the fact that these were not the same people that I was dealing with. They hadn't been inspired in the same way by the gradual improvements that eventually became very substantial, yet I was instructing and attempting to foster a style of intense dedication that only followed great inspiration through evident success. So I decided to tone it back a little, be less demanding, and take smaller bits of pieces, practice them thoroughly using various technical aspects, and allow these people to witness for themselves how much this type of methodology can improve their abilities. Observing this firsthand inspired them in the same way it did for the last group. Now that I had their inspiration, they were in turn dedicated, and I could increase the amount I demanded from their sectional practices, which other section leaders again adopted, without losing devotion. In fact, this increase in production inspired them as well. Motivation was high again, with the technical ability improving greatly. Then time came again for the county festival. I was very worried, as I knew the outcome of this performance could potentially shape the way these people perceive the amount that their effort means. Luckily, we received a 1, and moved on to the state festival, where we received, incredibly, for the first time in school history, a 1 as well. Not only did we perform better as a group than the year before, we did so with less initial skill. This was a huge boost to my confidence as far as leadership goes, as it proved to me that I was adept in leading this orchestra, regardless of who I was actually leading. Perhaps more rewarding was the shift of defeat of these members who initially wanted to quit to extreme motivation. Tell me about one of your weaknesses. One of my primary weaknesses tends to be thoroughness to the point of being almost neurotic about it. While thoroughness and attention to detail is a positive trait in many regards, the perfectionism I have developed can oftentimes be a hindrance to my productivity. My musical background created an insatiable desire to eliminate all imperfection, as this is key to proper musical performance. While this sort of approach can indeed be useful, as it certainly allows one to improve in an area significantly, it can also slow productivity as a whole, as it sometimes focuses too much attention on insignificant details. For instance, while it is nice to have a very high attention to detail and perfection in mathematics, as it's an objective science, sometimes over-attention to such detail can lead someone to double, triple, and quadruple check problems that are intuitively obvious to them, which often happens to me. This becomes especially problematic when I am constrained for time. As perfectionism and intense attention to detail is both beneficial and problematic, I feel that I must learn how to choose when it's appropriate to focus on detail and when it's important to just move on. Tell me about a time you have failed. When I was a sophomore, I first came into the symphony orchestra with absurd expectations due to high performance in the all-county performance, a collaboration orchestra of members of school orchestras from across the county, where they held auditions and, essentially, students were placed based on their performance in the auditions, where I received the 4th chair my freshman year, beating out most seniors and all juniors. Although the expectations on me were very high the next year, I also, for completely egotistical reasons whose motives were very much unbeknownst to me, allowed the hype to get to my head. I believed I was nearly untouchable and was basically guaranteed to be the next concertmaster of the North Hagerstown High School Orchestra at the very least. This sort of relaxation made me very lax in my personal practice habits, as I believe I basically already had the job and I was far high and mighty above all other members. However, what I wasn't aware of was the fact that there was a junior exchange student participating with us that year who attended a music school back home, where she practiced in school for the majority of her day. Needless to say, while I definitely didn't see it coming, I was beaten out for the role of concertmaster. I was surprised and humiliated. Although I was humiliated, this also taught me that constant dedication was the only way to achieve proper success, and it also taught me the implications of overconfidence. As a result, I never allow myself to get too comfortable in my work, as it's a sign that I'm not pushing myself far enough. The more I push myself, the better I can become. Tell me about a time that you have had a conflict with someone else. During my last year in the orchestra, the teacher and I conflicted on occasion. The problem I saw in the orchestra was the fact that the teacher took a far too relaxed approach to teaching, from what I could tell from my own experience and success with the violin, that just simply wouldn't work. I was used to an incredibly rigid and very structured style of performance with the violin from my private instructor, and which worked fairly nicely. However, this teacher's approach was the polar opposite as such. For one, she did not act as a teacher. In order to create a functional group of non-professional musicians, you must be able to both point out what the students need to improve in and how they can go about improving in this regard. She only pointed out what needed to be improved, but she failed to specifically help these students improve, which, in my eyes, should be the central aim of a teacher. In professional orchestras, however, leaders do not teach, they simply conduct, assuming the players know how to improve if they must. Now, ironically, you would expect that my teacher would have taken this approach. However, my teacher did make this assumption, but she also didn't conduct. She simply played along with the various sections during the rehearsal. It had absolutely no positive impact on the students, as rhythm could not possibly be held without a conductor, and the students didn't learn from her playing along. This practice seemed to be simply for her own amusement, just to pass the hour and a half that we had class. As a result, All rehearsals combining all sections included her participation, making all time spent on this rehearsal completely wasted. The only times she wouldn't participate in this manner was during sectional rehearsal. As a result, I specifically made an effort to erase this wasted time by taking matters into my own hands and urging sectional rehearsal as often as possible. At first, my orchestra teacher was open to this, especially the fact that I was creating such initiative, but eventually grew against it as it countered her own personal teaching plans. Because of this, there was a bit of a power struggle, but it was not intended to be for my personal gain. I intended only to increase productivity for the group, and I was only looking out for their best interests by any means necessary, which in this case was taking matters into my own hands and promoting sectional practice. Give me an example where you have led others. As I have stressed many times throughout this interview, I led others as the concertmaster of North Hagerstown High School's orchestra in my junior and senior years of high school. In doing so, I led between 30 to 40 people per year. As a leader, I oversaw all 5 sections of the orchestra and ensured that all their individual efforts were focused. I didn't have the competencies required or the ability to teach each individual section how to play the specific parts, as my competency was limited to specifically the violin, as that was the only instrument I knew how to play. So I had to rely on the section leaders of the other 4 sections to use the methods I explained to them and to practice efficiently. Additionally, this is where she helped, my orchestra teacher provided extra attention to weaker sections that I lacked the competencies to teach. I only played the violin, so again, I was limited to the instruction of that. More specifically, I also act as the section leader of the first violin section. This was a huge responsibility, as the first violin section often carries the main melody of songs, making its strength completely imperative to the strength of an orchestra. I specifically utilized my expertise in the technical aspects of the violin, which I learned through many rigorous years of studies with my private instructor, to efficiently teach the section how to master pieces in a short amount of time, a practice that I was accustomed to with my private instructor's constant deadlines. As a result, I also knew how to manage these deadlines. Discuss something you have learned in class. In my leadership and organizational management course, I have learned various techniques of leadership, some of which I have implemented in the past unconsciously, and others that I must learn to adopt for the future. I have learned the importance for everybody to take on leadership roles in a company, which is very different from the mindset that I originally had coming into this class. In my mind, there was previously a large distinction between leader and follower, as evidenced by my own experience with many followers in an orchestra. However, this concept of everybody becoming a leader became evident to me as I began to think about how I took a significant leadership role. It was only through the desire to make organizational change that I became an activist, and therefore took on a stronger leadership role by taking matters into my own hands. Additionally, I learned the importance of empowerment among organizations. As I said before, I previously always thought of organizations having distinct leaders and distinct followers. However, I didn't realize how outdated these ideals really were, and the fact is that humans are naturally inclined to try to be in control in some way. Too much authority over people will absolutely belittle people, as it does in authoritarian governments. To keep employees' morale high, it is very important to empower people, whether it be through legitimate position, responsibility, or even taking consideration to suggestions they make. All these factors are important in becoming emotionally intelligent, which is empirically important to leadership and organizational management.